Regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religious affiliation, political persuasion, or any other diversifying factor, porn can impact anyone. If you've recognized the harmful effects of pornography in your life, or recognize the harms pornography can cause on society, we welcome you to become a fighter. As fighters, we strive to be bold, understanding, open-minded, and accepting. If you're ready to become an official fighter, we invite you to join the movement at ftnd.org/fighter. That's ftnd.org/FIGHTER. Join us in our fight for love by becoming a fighter today.
My name is Garrett Jonsson, and you're listening to Consider Before Consuming, a podcast by Fight the New Drug. And in case you're new here, Fight the New Drug is a non-religious and non-legislative organization that exists to provide individuals the opportunity to make an informed decision regarding pornography by raising awareness on its harmful effects using only science, facts, and personal accounts. We want these conversations to be educational, uplifting, and hopeful. As we sit down with experts, influencers, activists, and people with personal accounts, we cover a wide variety of topics that may be triggering to some. You can refer to the episode notes for a specific trigger warning. Listener discretion is advised. Today's episode is with Aaron Crowley. He was exposed to pornography at the age of 9 and continued to turn to porn throughout his adolescence. His porn consumption normalized sexual objectification and distorted his view of healthy sex. Later in life, Aaron experienced drug-facilitated sexual assault and image-based sexual abuse, which triggered trauma-induced hypersexuality. While in college, he entered the porn industry to make ends meet. During this conversation, we talk about his experience in the porn industry, how it negatively impacted him, and what he's up to today. With that being said, let's jump into the conversation. We hope you enjoy this episode of Consider Before Consuming.
I already said thank you. I want to say thank you again because honestly, my heart feels open and I feel gratitude to have this conversation with you today. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, the feeling's mutual. I'm very excited to be with Fight the New Drug. I love your guys' organization and your vision and just everything so much. I'm totally a fanboy over here.
Nice. Well, we are humbled by the support, so thanks. And for us to accomplish our mission statement is to educate on the harmful effects of pornography using science, facts, and personal accounts. The personal account aspect is kind of where you come in. In regards to the first question, to better understand your personal account, it might be good for us to better understand like who you were, and so that we can better understand your experience as we learn more about that. Can you talk to what your life was like growing up, Aaron?
Yeah, so I was raised by a single mother. My father left whenever I was younger, and because my mom was, trying to take care of us on her own, she, worked a lot, and so there was a lot of times that I was home alone with my brother or even just myself. My family likes to talk about how I basically raised myself.
Okay.
In a lot of senses, because she had to become provider and nurturer and she had to fill in all the roles,
Yeah, it's almost like she had to step up and that required you to step up.
Right.
Kind of thing.
And because I was home alone a lot with my brother, that's actually how I first encountered porn. I walked in on him and his friends watching porn. And, I was like 9 and they were like 14, 15. So his friend kind of jumped up and was gonna try to hide the TV,
Yeah.
But my brother was like, no, he needs to see this, and so he had me sit down with them and watch what was happening, and this was my first encounter seeing anything sexual, really knowing anything sexual.
Right.
It was my first encounter with anything about sex.
Right.
And so I had no idea what I was watching. But I realized now looking back, why my brother was very adamant of, no, he should watch this. I heard him whisper to my friend, see, I told you he isn't gay. And, the friend replied something like, I don't know, he could be looking at the guys. or something. But I guess what had been going on is my brother's friends would tease him that I was gay, and he, did what he could to, I guess, make me not be gay. And he thought porn was that, because in his brain and in a lot of young boys' brains, the idea is that, porn is a man's thing. It's a thing that makes you more masculine. It makes you more of a man, right? And so, and in his eyes, being gay makes you less of a man. And, having me at 9 years old watch porn with them, I think was his way of, proving to himself and his friends that I'm not gay, and to, I guess, encourage me away from being gay.
Yeah. This is kind of a personal question, so if you don't want to answer, that's fine. But do you hold any resentment towards your brother for holding that perspective at one point and kind of putting you through that scenario?
As I got older, like in my teenage years, yeah, a little bit. But as I got older from my teenage years, no. Like I totally I understand what he grew up in and what he, thought things were.
Right.
So I have more compassion and empathy for him now.
Yeah.
But there was a period in my teenage years as I was, coming out to myself and figuring things out and realizing things, there was a bit of resentment, and he and I had a lot of falling outs and a lot of issues.
That's tough.
Yeah. But today, I release forgiveness and have empathy for him and compassion, and
That's cool.
I love my brother.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
This is also a personal question, and you don't have to speak to it if you don't want to, but I think it's a pretty big deal. Like, at what point did you understand that you were gay?
So that's a whole nother journey.
It's a podcast for itself.
Right. Yeah. Let me try to give you the Spark Notes version. So I first heard the word gay from my cousins, who were using it and talking about it in a very homophobic way. I was probably about 8. And so whenever it was defined to me what gay meant, I realized, oh, I might be that. Like, that's what first went in my head. And then I realized the tone of how it was being used. And I was like, oh, and it's a bad thing.
The stigma behind it was apparent.
Yeah. And so I immediately, right off the bat, whenever I realized what that meant and I realized what it was, I realized that it was something I did not want to be.
That would be tough. As a heterosexual male, I've never experienced that, but I can imagine that would be exhausting.
Exhausting. I like that word for it. Growing up in that environment and hearing it used in a homophobic way and like realizing that's a part of yourself, it's very mentally consuming, because it's like this war immediately starts within you where you're like, I had a crush on this guy, so that means I might be this, but this is bad, so it's something I need to absolutely not talk about. It's something I need to absolutely, suppress within myself. And you know what? I think exhausting is a good way to describe that, because it's mentally exhausting. It's mentally, trying to not be yourself.
I think probably
trying to be something you're not. It's very exhausting.
Yeah, I think probably mentally and emotionally and socially, and which in turn is going to affect you physically.
Yeah,
it's tough. Did your first exposure to pornography lead to you seeking out porn later in life?
Oh, yeah. So after that first encounter with pornography with my brother, and because of how positively it was presented, like I said, my brother and his friends made it seem like, if you watch porn, that makes you more of a man. I definitely, whenever they were together watching porn again, I would watch it with them. And then whenever my brother wasn't home, I knew where he hid the videotapes. I knew where he hid magazines. There was a period of time where my uncle was staying with us. I knew where he hid his stuff.
Yeah.
And so, I would grab that stuff and I would watch it, look at it. And then whenever I got older and we got internet, we were a little bit on the poorer end, so we didn't get internet till later compared to like my peers. But as soon as we got it, whenever I had a moment, went online and searched for porn, and was looking up porn and doing all that online as well. So yeah, definitely porn played a big role in my childhood.
Yeah. Did you consume porn just to kind of like, I don't know how to say it, except for just like man up? Or was there an ulterior motivation of like some type of sex education or curiosity about sexuality? Or was it just trying to like be a man and then follow after your brother and his friends?
A little bit of all of that. So it was definitely, trying to relate to my brother and his friends, because they were older, so I looked up to them, right?
Of course.
There was a little bit of that. Like I said, it was my first encounter with sex, so it became my sex education. I didn't necessarily go searching for it and looking for it to learn about sex. Like, that wasn't really in my mind, but it was how I had learned about sex.
Yeah. This is kind of like an abrupt transition, but it kind of has to be because you're a person who has experienced drug-facilitated sexual assault or rape, and that's a big part of your experience. I'm just wondering if your porn consumption early on normalized that sexual objectification of how you saw sex and how you saw yourself.
Yeah, absolutely it did. So, like I said, whenever I got a little older, we got the internet. And so I started looking up things online. Well, now because I had the internet and I could be more anonymous and I could search my own stuff, that's whenever I found gay pornography. And what I saw in gay pornography seemed to validate the things that had been told to me about gay people, how gay people were displayed to me, which was, hypersexual, over-sexualized, gay men are men, so they always want sex. And it was also very violent, It was not just violent, but homophobically violent. I heard homophobic and transphobic words used. There was a lot of violence, smacking around, even rape. A lot of the gay porn I encountered was gay rape porn. Like, I guess I probably shouldn't tell you the specifics, but it was very violent and aggressive. So that began to solidify in me what it meant to be gay. Like, I learned. You asked, did I learn sex education through porn? I learned what it means to be gay and what gay sex is, what gay intimacy is through porn. And so whenever I was in college, whenever I went to college, I was freshly new. I just came out. And because I'm new to college, it was like my first week in college. I got on the internet to look for other gay men who were freshmen at my school to like see, hey, are there any meetups or what are people doing? I need to make friends, right?
Right.
And so I met this guy online who said that he was going to another guy's house and they were going to have a small little get-together party. Well, at that little party, I got drunk to the point that I don't remember really much of anything. And then I woke up the next day. I was basically naked. The guy who invited me, he was on the floor, passed out with a camera. And, I was too hungover for it to really understand what was going on. But I knew in my gut, like, I did not feel very good.
Right.
Later that day, the guy who took the pictures let me know. He said the pictures came out really hot from last night. And then it just, like, dawned on me and, like, everything that happened, like, clicked. That night, I had been raped and pictures were taken and he was sharing them all over the internet. And, when that happened, the immediate thoughts that went to my mind were things that I had seen in pornography. And so my mind went to, this is normal. We're often portrayed, LGBT plus people are often portrayed as over-sexualized and hypersexual, and that we're just about hooking up, right? We're just about sex. And I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's how we're portrayed. And I know many of us often own that portrayal as part of our identity. That's how it was painted to me. That's what was going through my mind when all this was happening. And it became normal to the point that I didn't even really actually understand at that time that it was rape. That word didn't cross my mind, but I knew in my gut I was very uncomfortable. I was not okay with what happened. I asked the guy to take the pictures down. I was like, don't share that. Please delete all those pictures. And his response to me was, why? Guys think this is hot. Everyone thinks this is hot. You're hot. This is really cool. And so it normalized to me, okay, this is what it means to be gay. This is how I get validation from other gay men. This is what it means to be a part of the LGBT community and everything. And, I eventually talked the guy into deleting those pictures, or at least that's what I thought he showed me. He was deleting them, but then later someone told me he still had them. He still said that he deleted them, so I don't really know what happened with all of that. But and I didn't know what to do. Because it was so normalized to me, I didn't go to the police. And then if I did go to the police, what would they do? It's on the internet.
Yeah.
And then also because I'm a guy, again, I didn't think men could be raped, and I was afraid of being ridiculed because of that. And all these victim blame mentalities started entering my mind of, well, I was drunk, so it's, my fault. And, I'm gay, so, it's something I probably would have chosen, or I probably would have wanted to do. So I didn't really speak to anyone about it until years later as I was writing my book.
Wow.
And that's kind of, and going in and processing it years later and processing all that trauma, that's, how I realized, what, I'm going to speak out on this because I need this mentality to be destroyed. I actually even just recently, that mentality that caused me to normalize my rape, it's so prevalent even still today. And a part of me is probably because of pornography. Pornography has normalized this idea of, people can be obligated to have sex with someone.
Right.
And that kind of goes off into a whole bunch of other points that we're probably going to get to.
Porn does normalize exploitation.
Yeah.
And that's just straight facts. As you were talking, I couldn't help but think about Terry Crews's experience. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but maybe you're not, with him being sexually assaulted. And it's pretty interesting because, I think he's 6'3", 230 pounds of, he's probably 8% body fat and played in the NFL and all these things. And so I think there is that perception that he can't be sexually assaulted.
Right.
And he was sexually assaulted, and it negatively impacted him. And it just speaks to that if you're a man, you can't be sexually assaulted. You can't experience rape, but that's just, it's not true.
Right.
Well, as I think about your experience with not only drug-facilitated sexual assault or rape, but also with the image-based abuse that you experienced, with him sharing your photos without your consent, it's interesting because we don't know. This is just speculation, but some of the people who saw those images, it's very likely that they thought you were consenting.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of want to point that out because that's one of the main issues with user-generated content on mainstream internet porn sites is you don't know all of the context. and you can't be sure that it's consensual.
Absolutely. That's right.
So rewinding back to 2008, 2009, when you had this very, very challenging and negative experience with the drug-facilitated sexual assault and then also the image-based abuse, like, did you have anyone to talk to? Was there a trusted someone that you could talk to about these things that you were facing?
Yeah, no, like I said, I didn't speak to anyone about it. I didn't even have the words for myself.
Oh, okay.
Like, all of it was being processed in my mind, being warped with, what I knew from porn and what I had seen or how I had seen gay men portrayed, in the media and from, family members and, just general homophobia.
Right.
Like all of that kind of melded together, and that's how I was processing
It's like
rape.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just
You're
think
fine.
it feels like the shame and the stigmas were like paralyzing you.
Yeah, because I didn't know where to find a safe space to talk about it and to process it. Because my own self, I wasn't a safe space to process and talk about it because of the shame and stigma that's already been put on me.
Yeah.
I was not a safe place to process what was happening.
It's
and
almost
what had
like,
happened.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, you were not a safe space. That's really interesting. It's almost like you were, and I'm not blaming you when I say this, but I'm just making an observation. It's almost like you were participating in victim blaming because you just didn't understand. It's not that you were truly like blaming yourself. It's just that you didn't understand the context of all these things.
Exactly. Yeah, because those mindsets and that mentality was so normal to me.
Yeah.
I victim blamed myself. I was
Dang.
processing it in the sense of, well, this is all my fault. I chose to go over there with people that I barely knew.
Mm-hmm.
It was all in my mind my fault as I was processing it.
Right. It's like drugs and alcohol and being with people you're not familiar with, like, these do increase the risk a little bit, but that doesn't make exploitation okay, right?
Right.
Oh man, it's a lot. Well, I don't know. I can't help but think about how traumatic that must have been. And when I think about trauma, one of the negative consequences is like nightmares. And the reason why this comes to mind is because we experienced a pretty significant earthquake a couple of years ago. And after that earthquake, I had some nightmares about earthquakes. And then also when a truck would drive past and like it kind of rumbles the building, like I thought there was going to be another earthquake. And I think that's what's interesting about trauma is that it can make you scared of maybe things that you really shouldn't be scared of. Like, I don't know. I'm just wondering how you started to trust men again eventually, or like, I'm wondering if you had nightmares because of all of the traumatic experience that you had.
Yeah, I did. I've had like, trauma nightmares, and actually they had like I hadn't had them in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And then actually just a couple of weeks ago, I had one. Dang. For the first time in a while. And it wasn't really about my rape. It was actually about my time in the porn industry. I woke up in the middle of the night from a nightmare from back then. Yeah. It was like, I was in my nightmare. I was in that moment. I was living again. Mm-hmm. in that time. And then, thank God I woke up and, my husband was asleep next to me, and I just looked over. I was like, okay, I'm home in my bed. But nightmares and things like that weren't the main way that I learned to cope with what had happened. Yeah. Actually, the main and biggest way that I coped with that sexual assault was hypersexuality. Because like I said, I was in a safe space. I was processing it in my mind with all the shame and victim blaming. And, I dove deep into, gay hookup culture. And, I became very hypersexual. And, I've since learned that that's actually a very common trauma response to sexual assault and rape is hypersexuality, because we're subconsciously trying to regain control. And we're putting ourselves in similar situations where we're kind of hoping for a different outcome, or we're trying to control the outcome. But what happened to me is I ended up finding myself in more situations where I was sexually assaulted, where I was raped again. And that it just made rape and sexual assault, it made my sexual objectification more normalized. To the point that, it became like a normal part of my life that I was almost expecting it. And yeah, that's what eventually, whenever porn was presented to me, that's what made it so easy to, jump into the porn industry.
Yeah. How many years, I guess I shouldn't say years because I'm not sure if it was even a year, but how much time did you spend in the porn industry?
It was about a year, actually.
How did you enter the porn industry? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Like I said, I was diving into gay hookup culture, and I got into a gay hookup app, an app, that's specifically geared towards, gay men hooking up.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was on that app, and one day a guy reached out to me and said, "Hey, I think you'd be really good in this, and I'd like to invite you to." I don't know if he used the word audition, but he invited me to his studio to take pictures to submit to studios, because he was kind of like a talent scout agent manager type for the porn industry. Yeah. And so, like I said, it was so normal to me. The idea of being in porn was normal to me because, those pictures had been taken. I had grown up with porn. I was already hypersexual because of everything. I was trying to regain control. And this seemed like a really great option to help pay, the rest of my way through school and, get myself a little bit more financially stable, because at that time I was very much not financially stable. I was struggling just to get money for food, and rent and all of that. So it seemed like a good option.
Yeah, it seems
so.
So I
took him up on that offer.
Yeah.
And yeah.
You've already talked to this guy's tactic a little bit, but it might be helpful to also go into the experience, like that first time being in porn and what that was like for you, and maybe some of the unhealthy behavior or exploitation that this, talent manager used. We call him a talent manager. I don't know, just exploiter.
I call him my pimp today.
Okay, yeah. Like it might be helpful when we're talking about the harmful effects of pornography. It might be helpful to understand tactics used by your pimp.
Yeah. So whenever I went to his studio to take the pictures, it was kind of what I expected, pose in front of a bare wall, while he took pictures. Well, there came a point where he unzipped his pants and pulled out his penis and sat in a chair, and he looked at me. He didn't really look at me. He kind of looked past me. I actually talk about this in my book, where he didn't really make eye contact with me whenever he said this. But he said, if you want to be a part of this industry, this is a part of it. And what he was doing there was basically seeing if I would be comfortable with exactly what was going to happen to me in porn. Mm-hmm. Where I no longer was in control of my body.
Right.
Was I going to submit and do what I was told? Was I going to acquiesce to the demands of the producers and, everyone else on set.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting to me is what he did in any other industry would be considered sexual assault because he's an employer. He's an employer with power, with a power dynamic over me as an employee, asking for a sexual favor.
Yep.
That's sexual assault. But because it's porn and because sex is the nature of, the industry, because sexual assault is the nature of the industry, it's normal. This is exactly what goes on. And, even he said it. This is, if you want to be a part of this industry, this is a part of it. He right there was saying, without saying, he right there was saying sexual assault is a part of this industry. Yep. And I like to bring that up to people who are like in defense of the porn industry. I like to point out and say, okay, so, that power dynamic of an employee, if an employer asks an employee for a sexual favor, that's sexual assault because there's a major power dynamic involved. Where does that line get drawn? Where does it get drawn that we can step over into the porn industry and say, oh, asking for sexual favors, actually asking for sexual acts in exchange for money, it's acceptable when? Where's that line drawn?
Yeah.
Like, when's it acceptable for the employer to request, sexual favors from an employee for money?
Yeah.
Where's that line?
Just imagine.
Because all of a sudden it's acceptable because there's a camera, but it's not acceptable in any other place.
Right. And just to kind of elaborate on what you're saying, it's like, imagine going on LinkedIn and this person's like, yeah, to work here, and then pulls out their genitals and says, this is part of it. It boggles my mind that that is one of the job requirements in the porn industry, to be tolerant of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape.
I mean, that's the nature of it. We're not going to say those words, right? Like, that's not good for the PR. But that's essentially what it is. Again, it's an employer asking for sexual favor and sexual acts from employees. Yeah. That in any other situation is sexual assault.
And this question's kind of off the cuff, and if you don't want to answer it, then just say so. My question is regarding coercion, because if you look at the definition of coercion, it's to persuade using threat. And this talent agent, or also known as your pimp or this exploiter, for him to say, this is part of it, if you don't participate, basically it seemed like he was insinuating that if you didn't participate, if you weren't okay with this, then you couldn't be in the industry. And to me, that's a form of coercion. So I'm just wondering, do you identify as like a victim of sex trafficking? Because it seems like potentially by legal definition, that could fall within that definition. I don't know.
Yeah. So I've grappled with that a lot. And so I don't know about calling it sex trafficking necessarily. But even if I wasn't sex trafficked, I definitely was exploited.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that a common belief amongst general society is that people who enter the porn industry enter because they have just a higher sex drive. So I'm just wondering, what would you say to that person? Like, based on your experience, that definitely was not the case.
Yeah, based on what I've seen, I don't think anyone, myself included, anyone that I knew in the industry, I don't think any of us really necessarily had a higher sex drive than our peers, of the same age.
Yeah.
I think we generally probably were about average, right?
Yeah.
But what I do think sticks out is I do think there was, a bit of, for at least my case, I can definitely say there was hypersexuality as a response of trauma.
Right.
And so there needs to be a distinguishing there. Is it a higher sex drive, or is it hypersexuality in response to trauma? Because hypersexuality in response to trauma may look like, from the outside, a higher sex drive to someone.
Yeah.
But if you get to know the person and you dig into their psyche, you would see that they're hypersexual because of trauma. And I've seen that often in the porn industry. I definitely can speak for myself that that's my situation.
Yeah.
I can't obviously speak for everyone, but I have seen it for other people as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, from your first time in the porn industry, what was it that drove you to perform more consistently in porn over that next, 7 months, almost a year?
I was in the industry and I stayed in the industry because I needed the money. Like I said, I was in school whenever I started, and I needed it to finish school. I needed the money to help, pay my rent and feed myself, but also to pay tuition and, other school fees. And then whenever I finally graduated, the economy was not doing very well, and it was very hard to find entry-level jobs. And so I was not getting work anywhere. And so, porn kept me afloat after graduation as well. And, I've heard people ask, well, why didn't you just, like other millennials at the time, why didn't you just move back home with your mom? And so I didn't feel at the time that my family was a safe space because of just situations going on at home, and especially because I was gay and still grappling with that and figuring that out. Home with my family did not seem like a very safe option. And so I'm just out here trying to make it on my own until hopefully, I find a little bit more stable work.
Yeah.
But, like I said, the economy was not doing very good. And so that became very difficult. And so porn seemed to be becoming, more of my career.
Yeah.
Quote unquote career.
Right. I think one thing to learn from your personal account is that stigmas are unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you look at a psychologist, one of the requirements for being a psychologist is to hold unconditional positive regard for the people you work with. And it seems like that same standard should be held by caregivers, including parents. We should have unconditional positive regard for the kids we care for. Because I just wonder, what would have been different if you did have a place to go and to open up and engage in genuineness and acceptance and receive some empathy.
Yeah.
It's tough to think about, but...
Something I encountered a lot while I was in the industry is a lot of the other young gay men that I was in the industry with, a lot of them were in it trying to survive because they had no other resources.
Yeah.
I encountered often many who were kicked out of their home because they were gay, and they were, now surviving with their boyfriend by living in hotels or sleeping on friends' couches and doing pornography and having survival sex, basically.
Yeah.
And it's very, very common in the LGBT plus community for us to resort to survival sex when we're in those situations. Because, again, we're a over-sexualized community. So, we're stigmatized with it to the point that it becomes normal to us. And then whenever we're in situations where we're young, have no job skills, can't find work, and needing a means to survive, and these opportunities are presented to us, we resort to survival sex.
Right. Well, we appreciate you shedding some, more understanding on what happens. It seems like the porn industry tries to virtue signal and pose as an ally
For LGBT plus people. Yeah.
But then the thing that's frustrating to me is at the same time they perpetuate some of the misrepresentations and profit from the misrepresentations of the LGBTQ plus community.
Right. Yeah, you just hit the nail on the head. Like I said, we as LGBT plus people, we aren't often taught about our sexual orientations, our gender identities, but we still have to learn, healthy sexuality.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, so many in my community do go to pornography to learn about our sexuality and our gender identities. And, that's why the porn industry often poses as an ally for us.
Yeah.
But whenever you dig into it and you're watching it, especially being on this side of it, I can see now just how homophobic all the material, all the content that the porn industry produced was. Like, it's so violent and degrading. And, I often hear from, the crowds that you and I are probably familiar with about, straight porn.
Yeah.
For lack of a better word, I don't know what else to call it. Straight porn.
Right.
That it's violent and it's aggressive, especially towards women.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing in the gay porn industry and and trans porn as well.
Right.
Is that it's violent and it's portraying our gender and our sexuality. It's portraying it as this violent, coercive rape.
Right.
Like,
it's just not healthy.
Thing.
Like,
yeah.
I don't know, like healthy sex is such an awesome thing, but the porn industry, generally speaking, it just distorts it.
Right. It, I often, I commented on a post that Gil Dines made a couple months ago, and she was really intrigued by this because she pointed out, like, a lot of people will point out that in straight porn, the woman is being aggressed against, like there's violence towards her.
Right.
In gay porn, violence is often portrayed still towards the receiving individual.
Yeah.
And often what I experienced often in the porn industry is the receiving individual was a gay individual. And the one who was portraying the violence was a straight person, a straight man.
That had been hired.
Right. Who was gay for pay for that scene.
Yeah.
And that right there, I'm, looking back at those type of scenes that I was in, I'm like, that is straight up homophobia. They're having a straight person, a straight man, sexually violating a gay man. It's still the same thing that, porn is saying to women in straight porn, where it's saying, men are aggressors against you and this is normal.
Yeah.
To gay people, we're being told by porn, still, men are aggressors against us, and this is normal, and this is what we should submit to. This is our sexuality.
Right.
This is what it is. The homophobic terms, like I've seen, the F word used, and by the F word, I mean
not
A word,
not
the F U. Yeah, yeah. I've seen all that used in the porn industry, and it normalizes it, and they somehow get a pass for all of that, and they're still called, allies of our community. And often at gay pride events, you'll see booths and whole sections where it's like, this is the adult entertainment section, this is the porn section, and it's so celebrated. And I think the celebration, again, comes from because we don't have many outlets to learn about our sexuality healthily.
Right.
So many of us resort to porn.
I can relate to that as like a heterosexual male. You probably have experienced something to an even greater level, like the lack of resources to learn about healthy sex. Mm-hmm. But even me, like as a heterosexual male, like I didn't have many resources, and my parents are great parents, but they didn't talk to me about healthy sex growing up.
Right.
And so, I mean, even no matter really what your sexuality is, I think we're kind of in a similar boat in that way, where we're turning to porn oftentimes because it's like, where else do we turn to learn about sex if no one wants to talk to us about it?
Right. And often, no matter if you're straight and you're learning, if you're gay and you're learning about it, we're being taught, those who grew up learning about sex from porn, we're being taught that sex is violent and aggressive,
Yeah.
and that we're not making love, we're making hate.
And you act on someone
Yeah.
instead of
and it's about
mutual
sorry.
participation. No, sorry, you're good.
Yeah, and I often, see people thinking that it's about, I need to be pleased. I need, they need to please me.
Right.
When really sexuality, healthy sexuality is, I want to please my partner. And whenever you both come together and you're like, I want to please this person, and they're like, I want to please this, they want to please
Right.
you, like that gets real steamy.
It's a beautiful thing.
It's very
Healthy
beautiful,
sexuality is healthy.
Yes, it's healthy and it's sexy. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know
It's
how
pro
else to say it.
sex.
It's true pro sex.
Right.
Yes.
We want to be loyal to the absent, and I acknowledge that because the next question is kind of talking about, I guess you've already kind of answered this actually, regarding like other men in the industry. It sounds like their experiences were similar to yours. Did you have anyone as like an outlier that you met in the porn industry that was like, had a really healthy sexuality and was like there for the right reasons and it was completely consensual? Did you have any outliers like that?
I honestly, I'm glad you're asking this question, because honestly, I can't think of a single individual. There's two individuals that come to my mind as good examples. One's an example of why they're there. The other one's about how we cope with being there. Mm-hmm. One individual on my first scene, he wasn't new to the industry, but I was, and there was another person there who was also new to the industry. So this person who wasn't new, kind of introduced us a little bit and kind of helped us know what to expect.
Right.
In the process, he told a little bit of his story. He actually had performed years prior in the industry, but then he started dating a boyfriend who took care of him and, housed him, fed him, all that. So he stopped doing porn because he no longer needed to.
Yeah.
He was being provided for. He had someone to support him.
Yeah.
Whenever he and that boyfriend broke up, and he no longer had a home, he no longer had regular meals, he no longer had, the support and someone to provide for him, then he went back to porn, and that's when I met him. Is he was back because he didn't have any other means.
Yeah.
So, back then this didn't dawn on me, but it was later looking back that I'm like, oh my gosh, he didn't want to be there. If he really wanted to be there whenever he had the boyfriend and was being provided for, he would have continued doing it,
Yeah.
But now that he was no longer dating his boyfriend and he didn't have the provision, he was doing it.
Right.
Because he didn't have support. And that has always clicked to me as that's also why I was there. That's why so many of us were there, is if we had other options, we would go to those. But we didn't have other options.
Right.
Another individual who comes to my mind, it was one of my last scenes. It wasn't my last, but it was one of my last scenes. While I was grappling with if I'm going to stop. Mm-hmm. It was after I had done a shoot. My scene was over. We're wrapping, and I'm about to leave. I see this individual coming down the hallway, stumbling, drunk, like having to lean up against the wall to hold himself up. And I'm just like, hey, man, are you okay? And he's, drunk, and he's like, I'm fine. Right? Like he was barely coherent, couldn't understand him. My co-performer and I take him, we prop him up on our shoulders, and we take him to the set, and we, help lead him to the set, and we lay him on the bed, and we leave him there. And as I'm, again, leaving, my co-performer is like talking to me. He's like, I don't want to perform with him because he's a mess. Like he's always drunk, or he's always on drugs, or he's something, because, he was crying the other day saying he doesn't really want to be in porn and all of this. And right then I stopped, and I like had an epiphany moment, and I looked at my friend and I said, do any of us really want to be in this? And he took a moment and he confessed, if I had other options, I guess I would take them, because he was an example of someone who was kicked out of their home and they were doing this as survival sex, to take care of themselves. And it dawned on me that I had just left this other performer who was drunk and stumbling and incoherent. I had just left him on a bed to perform a scene for the porn industry in front of the cameras. I had just left him on a bed in the same state that I was the night that I had been raped and pictures were taken of me. And in that moment, it's like all these things started like bursting in me of, oh my gosh, it just kind of bookended this whole season of my life where I'm like, all of this is not right. And it's all tying together as this one spirit, this one mentality, this one like mindset that's so normalized in our world. And it all stems from porn.
Wow.
And it's sexual assault. That's just paid and on camera. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Did I even answer your question?
Yeah, you don't need to question if you answered it because you definitely did.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't even remember what your question was, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to talk about these two situations.
It was about just like if there were any outliers who had just like who did have other options, who weren't doing it for survival sex, who didn't have an unhealthy, like hypersexuality triggered by trauma.
Right. And no outliers. Yeah. I can't think of a single outlier, but those two situations are like ingrained in my memory.
Wow.
As things that just solidified to me why we're there and what it's like being there.
Being conscious of that, like the fact that you kind of helped that person get on set and then realizing what had just happened, that must have been a heavy realization. I'm just wondering if that was like, do you consider that one of your low of lows?
It was the beginning of my low of lows.
Ooh, wow.
It was a situation that definitely started triggering to me that, I really probably need to get out of this. But I stayed in porn for a little bit longer. And what ended up being my low of lows is there was this cycle, even during that scene, but it kind of snowballed further. There was this cycle going on where I would catch an STI and, the porn industry doesn't have health insurance, or at least it didn't provide health insurance at that point. Mm-hmm. But I would catch an STI. I'd have to get treatment. But while I was in treatment, I couldn't be in porn to make the money. Mm. So then I'd be in treatment. Then I'd have to immediately go back to porn to get the money to pay off my medical bills and then to continue to survive.
Damn.
And then again, I'd catch another STI. And then again, I'd have to get treatment. And there just became this cycle of that going on until one time I had an HIV scare. And that the realization that I left him to be sexually assaulted on set, that whole cycle going on, then finally an HIV scare, I had an immense panic attack. And, and I don't know if you've ever had a panic attack, but in a panic attack, you start to think you're dying.
Yeah.
And, like you're having a heart attack and you're about to just kill over.
Yeah.
But in the midst of that panic attack, everything just kind of stopped. And that just shifted everything. And actually, it was from that moment on, it became more and more uncomfortable being in porn. And it's from there that my life just completely transformed.
Well, thank you for sharing all of those things. Going back, one thing you said that was kind of interesting to me when you're talking about STIs and some of the negative consequences of being in the porn industry, I couldn't help but think about income versus expenditures. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering, like, did you actually end up making money? Like, did you make any decent money in porn, or if you were weighing out the income versus expenditures, did it end up being not that beneficial, monetarily speaking?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this actually just the other day. Because I feel like the medical bills that I had for it, that like just the damage is done to my body and, with the STIs and everything, there were medical bills that I continued paying, even after I left. I just feel like, with all of those, if we accumulate all of those together, I feel like, it cost more, to be in. Like, I feel
That's
like it definitely cost a bit more for me. I can't speak to everyone's situation, but
I don't know if this is true or not, but I don't know if you've watched that interview with Mia Khalifa on the BBC.
Mm-mm.
She talked about her experience in porn, and if I'm remembering correctly, she says that she made about $12,000 from porn, and like she's one of the most watched individuals ever in porn, and she claims she only made $12,000 anyway.
Like minus all the expenses and stuff?
I don't know. She didn't get into that context. She just, I think from what I remember in the interview, she just said she made $12,000. And like, can you imagine if like one of the most viewed people in entertainment, like a healthier entertainment, like let's say an actor or a singer, like one of the most viewed, or if they had only made $12,000, like that would be a sign that there's exploitation happening somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I warn people it's not as lucrative as we want to paint it out to be. Porn, I don't think people realize, porn is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And because they have so much money, they have great PR. So they have, great ways of making themselves look better, than what they really are.
Right.
Making it seem like it's glitz and glamour and it's like any other part of the entertainment industry. Like, I said earlier, the guy who I called my pimp now, he was a talent agent or a manager, talent scout, whatever. Those were the words we use, but he was my pimp. We hear words like porn star and, all that to glitz and glamour it up, but really, we're prostituted people. And I don't think people realize that. If we use the real words for what's really going on, like I think it'll be a little less glamorous. It'll present the reality. But instead, because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry with great PR, we want to use all these images and all these paint this idea that it's glitz and glamour.
Yeah.
And it's not glamorous at all. And so, I don't know exactly everything that Mia Khalifa has been through and everything, but I'm not too surprised that she only made $12,000.
Yeah. Well, as you transitioned away from pornography, like how did you begin healing from the traumas that you had had?
Going into prayer and meditation, it was that alone time in my prayer and meditation time that really was very healing and therapeutic for me. And then also as I dug in and researched and learned more, like whenever I first got into this type of research on the porn industry and sexual trauma and all that, it really shed a light on me and kind of opened my eyes to understand things from a psychological point of view. Whenever I went to the National Center on Sexual Exploitation's summit, like I think it was their first summit that I went to, all the information that I got from you guys, from other individuals, that was very healing to me to kind of learn all those facts and stuff, because I was able to understand it through the lens of my experience and kind of be like, oh, this is like that experience and this is like that experience, and it kind of brought it all together. Yeah.
Well, looking at yourself today and your relationship with your husband and comparing that to your sexuality early on, like part of the mainstream narrative that porn tries to push is that porn can improve your sexuality. And I think this is maybe a stupid question because I might know the answer to it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Like, do you feel like your sexuality today is healthier without porn in your life?
Absolutely. And it's not a stupid question. Yeah, absolutely. My sexuality is so much healthier. I'm just overall healthier without porn today because, like I said, porn distorted sexuality for me. And now that I've had years away from it, I've relearned what sexuality really is. And it's so much more intimate. It's so much more connecting. It's so much more powerful than what porn portrays, what porn could possibly ever portray. Because whenever someone's given money for sex, that's not intimacy. Like, that's coercion. You know, if they need money to do it, they don't really want to have sex.
Right.
But they're being coerced because they need to. They need the money. And so now they're obligated to in exchange for the money. And there's no true intimacy in that. You can't buy intimacy. But with true healthy sexuality of, you know, two people coming together and enjoying each other's, trying to please each other, as opposed to, you know, trying to get pleasure from the other, trying to please each other, trying to be pleasing. There's just an intimacy and just a power behind that's not possible whenever money is exchanged for the sex.
Yeah.
Whenever it's behind a screen, you know, and you're alone in your room. Like, it's just not possible. There's such a power whenever it's real and authentic and intimate.
Thanks for speaking to those things. It makes a lot of sense. We've talked about some heavy things, and we've talked about your low of lows and some of the traumas that you've experienced. I shouldn't say all of the traumas, but some of the traumas you've experienced. And man, it can be a heavy thing to talk about this stuff. I think it's also important to talk about, you know, the hopeful side. I'm just kind of wondering, what does your life look like now?
Yeah, so my life is drastically different.
Yeah.
I now have a job outside of the porn industry that pays well enough, and I'm able to take care of myself and my husband and feed ourselves, pay our rent. Like I said, I'm married now. We're about to celebrate our 7th anniversary in March.
Nice.
I'm not allowing myself to be bought and used for sex anymore. Sex is something I see as a special part of my relationship with my husband.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And what advice do you have for someone right now, if we have any listeners that are currently in the porn industry, but, you know, they want to transition out, but they're unsure if they'll be able to? Do you have any words of advice for those people?
Yeah, my main thing whenever I encounter someone who's still in the industry is I want to remind them that they are worth so much more. And many of them know that. Many of them know that they are worth so much more. You're worth so much more, and you are worthy of real, true love.
Yeah, I believe that as well. Well, Aaron, as the conversation kind of comes to an end here, we want to leave you with the opportunity to have the last word. If there's anything that you haven't mentioned or something on your heart or mind that you wanted to talk to that we haven't talked to yet, we'd love to hear those thoughts as well.
So I think if I have any final words, my final words would just be to those who are still on the fence and trying to decide where they stand whenever it comes to pornography, is when you click on your screen and you decide you're going to watch that video, you're seeing images that have been edited, that have been put together in such a way that are just there to entice you and arouse you and to stimulate you sexually. They're not telling you what's going on behind the camera. They're not telling you why those people are in front of the camera to begin with. They're not telling you, what's going on in their minds. They're not telling you what's going on in their heart. They're not telling you their life story. They're not telling you any of their situation. And you have no idea what kind of trauma they may actually be going through. You don't know really what you don't have the intimacy that you're actually really wanting. You're not getting that.
Right.
In that situation. And so it's just this fake supplement to fulfill this deep human need that you have for intimacy, but it's not really fulfilling it. It's like your body's really thirsty and you need water, but you're trying to quench your thirst with Coke and Dr. Pepper,
Right.
and alcohol and
Salt
all the
water.
other, and salt water. Yeah, I like that example with salt water. It's not real intimacy. It's not, you're not really getting to know them, even if they're quote unquote celebrity porn stars, right? And they're out on these interviews and they are sharing a little bit of their personal life or anything. They're only showing you the bits and pieces that will get you to come back and watch them, because the industry needs to make money. That is their overall goal, is to make money and profit. And the more clicks and the more views helps that. And so they're not going to tell you the truth of why that person is there to begin with. Because if they told you the reality of that person's situation, you would not want to watch it.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, these conversations mean so much to me, and I've had a very enjoyable time talking with you.
Likewise.
And
Very much likewise.
We appreciate the fact that you're willing to be genuine and engage in some, self-disclosure and openness, because it helps us to consider before consuming.
Absolutely.
Want to bring Fight the New Drug to your school, business, or community event? Lucky for you, we're pros when it comes to live presentations. We provide information and entertainment to inspire your audience to consider how pornography can impact themselves, their loved ones, and the world around them. We'll present the facts in an interactive, age-appropriate, and engaging way so your audience can walk away with more information on the harms of porn. To book a presentation, visit ftnd.org/live. That's ftnd.org/LIVE.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Consider Before Consuming. Consider Before Consuming is brought to you by Fight the New Drug. Fight the New Drug is a non-religious and non-legislative organization that exists to provide individuals the opportunity to make an informed decision regarding pornography by raising awareness on its harmful effects using only science, facts, and personal accounts. If you want to learn more about today's guest and the conversation we had, you can check out the links included with this episode. Again, big thanks to you for listening to this conversation. As you go about your day, we invite you to increase your self-awareness, look both ways, check your blind spots, and consider before consuming.